If you clicked on this video, you've probably seen all the previous parts of the series, but if you haven't, up on screen there should be a couple of links. Number 1, a link to part 3, and number 2, a link to the playlist that you guys can actually check out for all the previous videos. That being said, I present to you all part 4 of What If Deku Was Isekai'd into Naruto.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Alright, so following the events of part 3, we immediately get back into the story after Sasuke just had his curse mark sealed by Kakashi. Now, the battle that would pretty much go on to happen would remain constant, and so nothing really would end up changing, due to Sasuke still having been bitten by Orochimaru in the neck and being implanted with the curse mark. Nothing in terms of that battle would have happened differently from the version of canon, so we will then get into Shinso versus Zaku, one of the members from the Hidden Sound team. Now that battle goes just like in canon. Then we have Kankuro versus Tsurugi, one of the random members from Konoha. Then we get into Sakura versus Ino, where this time around Ino would actually be a winner and actually end up slightly beating Sakura, just barely. Then we get into Tenten versus Temari, which we all know how that went, as well as Shikamaru versus Kin. Again, we all know how that went, as well as Naruto versus Kiba. Now, Naruto versus Kiba is actually going to be a little bit more of an interesting battle to cover, because this time around, Naruto this time has better chakra control, as well as better taijutsu, and also a more finesse approach to battle. He's not just going to be as much of a knuckle-headed ninja as he was in the original, meaning Naruto this time around is actually not going to be beating due to just, kind of farting in this man Kiba's face. He is actually going to be winning because of his pure skill alone. The immediate start of the battle would pretty much go as follows. Kiba would immediately tell Akamaru to change into his human form before Akamaru does this, and both of them would rush in at Naruto using the Fang over Fang. Naruto would use the body flicker technique to dodge out of the way, as he pretty much sees Kiba and Akamaru land away from him. At this point, Naruto would proceed to weave the hand signs for a wind bullet jutsu, and he would shoot it straight at Kiba's direction, causing Diva to have to dodge out of the way. And Naruto at this point would then look at Kiba before saying that this is not going to be like back in the academy. He's gotten stronger, and this time Naruto's going to win. And so what would end up happening after this is Naruto then goes on to rush at Kiba before he then throws a bunch of attacks, and Akamaru in his human form would rush in before throwing a bunch of attacks. So it would pretty much be like a 2-on-1. Naruto would then get hit by Kiba, sending him flying back before Naruto then says, alright then, as he weaves the hand signs for a chakra, not chakra, but the shadow clone, and he would summon 2 shadow clones before he would then say, alright, let's go! Immediately these 2 shadow clones would begin rushing in at Kiba's direction, as now Kiba and Akamaru would be the ones getting pressed. Immediately following this, Naruto would say that this is about the right time that he whips out one of his aces in the hole. And so, Naruto would actually end up saying, Multi-Shadow Clone Jutsu! Before the entire arena would be engulfed by like hundreds of Narutos. And all of them would rush in at Kiba and Akamaru, as Akamaru pretty much turns back into his dog form and lets out like a worried bark, as Kiba just sits there and is like, oh god, as Naruto just proceeds to fold this man like a lawn chair. It's not fun. It's not fun for anybody except for Naruto. And the aftermath of this would result in Kiba being taken away by a stretcher. Immediately after this, Naruto would then be offered an ointment by Hinata, as she would be trying to show to Naruto her appreciation and love, even though her teammate is in a stretcher. But that's besides the point. After this happens, we would have the rest of the battles, which would go as follows. We would then have Hinata versus Neji. That fight remains constant. Naruto still feels very enraged. Deku does as well, telling Neji that if he has the honor of fighting him, he's going to be destroying him. Gaara versus Rock Lee, just like usual, remains constant. Choji versus Dosu pretty much stays the same. And then after that, we end up having the pretty much announcement by Hiruzen telling everybody that that is it for the preliminaries, essentially telling them all that following this event, they will all be having 1 month exactly to train however they please. Following these events, Sasuke would end up actually be taken away by Kakashi on a training journey for that entire month, as he would end up telling Deku and Naruto that he's going to actually be focusing on Sasuke because that curse mark of his will be troublesome, as well as he needs to teach Sasuke how to control that Sharingan of his. And so, Sasuke would end up going off to train with Kakashi, while Deku and Naruto are left to their own devices. At this point, Naruto would kick a can down the road before saying, "It's always us by ourselves. Let's show them that we don't need nobody to train us. It's always just been you and me, right, Deku?" Deku would smile before saying, "Yeah, let's get started." And from here on out, they would have about 1 week worth of them just simply training by themselves, trying to better themselves in terms of Taijutsu, fighting against each other day after day for hours on end. This would actually cause Deku to notice a slight increase in his chakra supply, and Naruto would actually notice that he is becoming more tactically sound when it comes to the art of battle. So Naruto was improving and Deku was improving at a pretty decent rate. Not exactly fast, but they're improving nonetheless. As this is happening, Kakashi is currently training Sasuke in terms of the Sharingan as well as the Chidori. And so we would pretty much just be left with Deku and Naruto to their own devices. One of these days, they would actually end up on top of the Hokage Stone Monument. And while being up there, Naruto would look at Deku's direction before saying, "Hey, Izuku." He would say, "Thanks." And Deku would look at Naruto's direction before saying, "For?" As Naruto would say, "For being there. I honestly don't know what I'd be doing right now if it wasn't for you coming into my life when you did. I mean, you saw how the villagers treated me. Having a brother like you around, it just helped." Deku would remain silent for about 20 seconds before he immediately gets teary-eyed and begins crying up a storm. Naruto would say, "Come on, Deku, don't get emotional." And Deku would start pretty much being like, "I'm sorry, I can't help it." Before Naruto would be like, "Come on." And Deku would pretty much just be like having a heartfelt moment with Naruto. He would end up telling him that he wasn't much better off where he came from, and tell Naruto that thanks to him, Deku is living a life better than he ever could have imagined. Not only that, but now he has power, something that he lacked back in the world where he came from. Naruto would say, "About that world, you don't really like to talk about it much." Deku would say, "Oh yeah, well, what do you want to hear about it?" As Naruto would ask, "Who's the strongest guy back from your world?" And Deku would begin to explain All Might, all to Naruto, telling him that All Might is the greatest symbol of peace, and that All Might pretty much is the strongest person ever, saying that even now he's unsure if he would have ever been able to beat All Might. And at this current moment, honestly, I don't think Deku would have been able to, but maybe later on with some more training by a certain somebody. That being said, we end up having something else go on. So after these events, what would end up going down is essentially Deku and Naruto would end up deciding that they need to have 1 day of relaxation before going back to training. They would both end up going to hot springs. Before arriving there, they pretty much end up seeing an old man with white hair outside. Obviously guys, this is Jiraiya. This is where they would end up having the encounter with Jiraiya, and they would actually end up meeting Jiraiya and seeing his perverted nature. Naruto actually not be aware of who this even is, and Deku, as soon as he sees those white locks, would be like, "Oh, it's him." Before Jiraiya would then reveal himself to be the legendary Sannin, and Deku would be like, "I know you," before saying that, he was one of the greatest assets for the Great Shinobi World War. And so Jiraiya would end up having a smile on his face, realizing that his infamy definitely has spread. And so Jiraiya would have a smile on his face, before then Naruto speaks up and says, "You don't seem too special to me, you weird old perv." And Deku would end up saying that, yeah, that is a little strange, but he has to respect Jiraiya. He is very powerful after all. After hearing this, Naruto would suggest training with this old man, and Jiraiya would end up saying that, he's not here to train him. He has some important business to do here. Before Naruto would end up saying, "Come on, please, is there anything I could do?" And Jiraiya would smile before saying, "Maybe." He would rub his chin before then saying, "Can you bring me a hot kunoichi?" And Naruto would end up saying, "A hot kunoichi? I got this." He would say, "Shadow Jutsu," before he would then spawn in a bunch of transformation jutsus into girls. And Jiraiya, seeing this, would have a huge nosebleed before saying, "Dude, I'm gonna train you if you keep that coming." Following these events, they would both end up going on to train with Jiraiya, and both of them would actually go on to have a very decent bond with Jiraiya himself. Naruto would go on to try to summon Toads, as well as Deku would, but he was never quite able to summon Kamabunta due to the fact that Deku's chakra supplies were not exactly quite large enough. So instead, what Jiraiya would decide to do with Deku is actually train him in terms of chakra control, training him more in terms of different ways that would actually be helpful towards Deku and the way that he fights. And so he would have him doing chakra training as well as taijutsu training, and also telling Deku that he needs to actually be more of a lethal fighter, just because, you know, the fighting style that he goes on usually will never end up with anybody getting killed if he ever has to cross that line. So he would actually end up gifting Deku these two hidden knives that he's pretty much going to be wearing under his sleeve that will pretty much be a concealed weapon if the need were ever to arise. And so, you know, Deku would end up taking this into his arsenal and training with it for the 3 weeks that are left. So what would end up happening after this is Naruto continues to train with Jiraiya, trying to master the abilities of the Nine Tails, while Deku trains on what I had mentioned previously, as well as learning the Water Dragon Jutsu, a jutsu that he is only able to use at this level only 2 times per battle, or 3 times a day if he spaces them out evenly. And so what would end up happening is Deku would go on to train harder than he ever has, as Naruto, as I said, would be doing his own thing, and both of them would be trying to become more powerful alongside Jiraiya. And so that's pretty much how both of their time would be spent. Jiraiya would be out here training 2 students at the same time, and as we know, Jiraiya is definitely going to be capable of doing something like that. Naruto's training process would have been a little bit slower and faster at the same time, due to the fact that Jiraiya has to split his time between Deku, but also faster because this version of Jiraiya, or sorry, not Jiraiya, but Naruto has the desire to actually become more powerful a lot quicker. He is semi-competing with his brother, and it's kind of something that Naruto always sees as something that he has to do. And we all know that Jiraiya is exactly a pretty good sensei. I mean, he trained Nagato, Konan, and Nagato, Konan, and Yahiko. Yeah, he trained all 3 of them, and they all became pretty powerful ninjas. So I think that they would both get some pretty huge gains from this training overall. Not only that, but Deku's hair would actually end up growing a lot longer, similar to what Sasuke would have ended up having, but in a more Deku style. That being said, he would actually end up picking up on some more techniques, and like I said, Deku would be adding a strange weapon to his arsenal. Sorry for messing up so much. My vocabulary is just going by me. Reading the script is getting a little tedious, I guess you could say. That being said, getting back into the story, even though it's not his style, Deku would end up proceeding to be like, you know, I'll still use it either way. And following these events, Jiraiya on the final day would actually end up teasing the Rasengan to Deku and Jiraiya, telling them both that he'll teach them this jutsu only if one of them wins, and only one of them is going to be taught this. So both of them would look at each other before grinning and saying that they're going to be the one to win. Deku would say that he needs to master that jutsu, and if he wins, he'll just teach Naruto it, with Naruto saying that no, he wants to be the one to teach him that jutsu. So both of them would end up pretty much just having these cheesy smiles on their faces, before then both pretty much agreeing that they both now have to pass out, and the very next day meet up for the Chunin exams. And so the battles would end up starting, with the first battle being Naruto versus Neji. Now when Naruto did arrive to the arena, Neji would begin by being extremely cocky and maintaining distance. Naruto, seeing this, would actually end up creating a couple of clones to test the waters. Naruto and Neji would begin, and Naruto would try rushing in Neji's direction, trying to use a couple of attacks to try to negate Neji's gentle fist. After realizing that getting into close range combat was not going to work out, he would try throwing kunai and shuriken, but Neji's spinning jutsu that he uses to deflect things would actually end up dodging all of it. And so Naruto would be left in a position of like not knowing exactly what he has to do. He would rush in trying to use taijutsu against Neji, but it would pretty much all get shut down by Neji's taijutsu prowess, and Naruto would be put on the back foot very quickly in terms of this battle, thinking to himself that if he can't even beat Neji, then how is he supposed to defend Deku against, you know, real Chunins? And so Deku would be watching this battle as Naruto would get a pretty bright idea. He would begin creating tons and tons and tons of shadow clones, completely overwhelming Neji, or so he would think, as Neji just starts pretty much decimating them all completely, pretty much blowing through them and, making Naruto have a pretty tough time. Following these events, Naruto would end up deciding that, the only way he'll ever go anywhere is by rushing in himself and trying to figure Neji out himself. So he would do so before promptly having his chakra paths immediately closed off by Neji, and he would end up realizing that Neji is powerful for a reason. And so, after Naruto has a couple of his chakra points sealed off, Neji would end up getting ready to land more and more blows, using the 64 palm technique and landing all 64 of them on Naruto. After this, Naruto would land on the floor as he's on both knees and coughs out blood. Neji at this point would begin spouting about destiny, and how it was his destiny to win this battle and Naruto's destiny to lose. Before Naruto's eyes would glow ominous red color, he would then stand up and proceed to wash Neji, completely destroying this man. Even though Naruto's own power isn't what caused him to get this victory, I think it's fair to say that Naruto versus Neji pretty much kind of stays constant in the regards of Neji learning his lesson and realizing that destiny isn't what you would always think it is. So afterwards, we end up having Temari versus Shikamaru, which goes the same, with Shikamaru quitting. After this, we then have Deku versus Sakura, or no, not Sakura, but Ino. And I'm sorry to tell you guys, but this is a complete wash. I don't even want to get into the battle. She would try to use her mind transfer jutsu, but it just doesn't work. And Deku would proceed to use a Genjutsu on her, causing her to just be like, oh my god, Sasuke, no! Before she gets knocked out. And everybody's just like, seriously? After that, we then have Sasuke versus Gaara, which this time around, Sasuke doesn't actually end up arriving late due to the fact that we actually have the extra battle of Deku versus Sakura to buy him some time. And so, after that, we end up having Sasuke versus Gaara, which ends up going exactly like it does in canon. I wish I could say that this battle goes a little bit different, but it genuinely does not. Sasuke still ends up showing off the ability of copying Rock Lee's taijutsu, and at the end of the day, he was not able to penetrate Gaara's perfect defense, before abruptly taking out the Chidori and weaving the hand signs before saying, Chidori! And piercing Gaara straight in the shoulder, causing Gaara to see his blood for the first time and lose his shit. After this, we then have Naruto, watching in the stands as Gaara proceeds to scream and then run out of the arena. Sasuke begins running after him as Naruto and Deku both rush in as well. They would then see both of the Sand siblings come in as well, and it would then pretty much all remain constant in terms of the events in Konoha, meaning Hiruzen's death, Orochimaru fighting against Hiruzen, Kakashi and Guy pretty much having a little contest to see who can save more people and defeat more ninjas. So all of that pretty much ends up staying constant, so we're not really going to be covering that, and we're more so going to be focusing on along the lines of the battles between the Gaara team and Naruto's team. And so this time around, what would end up happening is Team 7 would be pursuing the Sand Squad. Now, have a little bit over 10 minutes on their way of running away from the village, Deku would actually end up staying back to fight against Kankuro, with Naruto saying if he's sure, and Deku saying not to worry about things. About halfway before they finally get to where Sasuke and Gaara were going to fight, Naruto would actually end up starting to try to fight Temari. And so, Sasuke would be pursuing Gaara before he finally ends up arriving to him, but that's the last battle we're going to be covering. So, we start off with Deku versus Kankuro. Now, the way that this battle would go down in my eyes, I believe, is Kankuro would immediately start off by revealing his puppet abilities. Obviously, Kankuro's abilities are a bit of a mystery to Deku because he's never fought against somebody like this, so he would come in more cautiously and thinking about every single thing that Kankuro does. He knows he's a puppet master, and he knows that puppet master use very dastardly techniques, I guess you could say, so he doesn't let his guard down. And Kankuro would end up trying to bait Deku into getting into a close range so he could hit him with his strongest ability, which is pretty much trapping everybody. And since Deku has already seen this in the Chunin exams, he knows to be wary of this. So he tries to keep his distance and use his long range attacks to actually weaken Kankuro over time. He does end up going into his chakra reserves, but in the end, he ends up actually defeating Kankuro by catching him off guard and quickly using the substitution jutsu, a shadow clone, and the body flicker in that order, before then revealing his brand new weapons and actually cutting Kankuro's back like in an X/ formation. He would lift both of his arms up as he cuts Kankuro and he falls onto the ground, and Kankuro from this moment forward tries to block with his puppets, but Deku then comes in and punches Kankuro right at the side of the head, knocking him out completely. Kankuro's out cold, and his puppet would then land on the ground before Deku says, "It's over," breathing heavily. He would then pick his stuff up before then running towards the direction of Sasuke and Naruto. And on his way there, he would actually realize that Naruto was fighting against somebody. This person being Temari. She's a long-range fighter, so this battle was going to be very bad for Naruto. He struggles a lot against long-range fighters, so he would be doing decently well until Deku arrives just in the nick of time to clutch this battle up and actually using something of a jutsu that by the name of water release splash bullet, knocking her down so Naruto could have just enough time to rush in there and clutch the battle up. After this, they both actually end up arriving just in time to stop Gaara from crushing Sasuke, as Gaara was pretty much lifting his arm ready to crush Sasuke after both of Sasuke's Chidori attempts would have failed. Gaara would have been coming in to punch him, but Naruto and Sasuke would both come in and use their bodies and their arms to pretty much push Gaara's attack away, saying he's not gonna hurt them. Sasuke seeing both of his teammates be right in front of him, trying to stop this attack at all costs, would end up kind of being like wow, like these guys genuinely care about me. After this, they jump away, creating some distance before they then create a plan to have Sasuke pierce Gaara with the Chidori. Now, I would love to tell you guys that this plan ends up working out and, some crazy thing happens, but the way that I see it, it will not work. All right, so hear me out. So what would have actually ended up happening is Deku would have ended up devising a plan where Naruto was going to be acting as bait with a shadow clone. Sasuke was going to be coming in, or not Sasuke, but not the real Sasuke, but Deku transformed into Sasuke would have came in and acted as a diversion, a second one, and the real Sasuke would have came in from behind and tried to hit Chidori on the back of Gaara. However, it ended up not even piercing Gaara, and it did pierce him a little bit, but the sand just regenerated and Gaara had a smile on his face. After this, Shukaku's voice can be heard as an evil, ominous laugh would go down, and then we would then immediately see something extremely creepy actually goes down. Gaara would end up transforming into a full-body Shukaku with Gaara on the top of Shukaku's head. Seeing this all go down, Naruto would say that it's about time he was able to put that Jiraiya training to use before slamming his fist on the ground after biting his thumb and releasing some blood and saying, "Summoning Jutsu!" After this, Deku's eyes would widen as he holds onto Sasuke, and all three of them actually end up landing on top of Gamabunta's head, where all of them simply overlook everything. Now, it's a Kage level battle. And Gaara, or Shukaku should I say to be more specific, would end up getting into a battle. All three of them would witness as Gamabunta holds his own against Shukaku, and eventually he would end up telling the team that he needs something in order to get the upper hand. So they would all end up using their imagination, or not imagination, but their chakra to transform Gamabunta into the nine-tailed beast. And once they do this, he's able to grab onto them just enough time for Sasuke to jump in and actually land a hit right at the back of Gaara's head, causing Gaara to wake up and then drop to the ground as all three of them land swiftly, and they land being atop of Gaara. And Gaara just pretty much looks at all of them before waking up and saying, "Ow, how did you beat me?" And Naruto would be just about to speak before Deku says that it was teamwork. Naruto would then interrupt Deku and say something along the lines of a Attack no Jutsu. Now, honestly, it's along the lines of friendship and how, relying on each other ended up making them be able to beat Gaara. And after hearing this, Gaara would be like, "Impossible. Friends don't help you. Friends don't exist." You know what I mean? Thinking all, pessimistic like about the situation before he then has a change of heart and the Sand siblings would pull up and save Gaara from his ultimate kind of torture. The end. Bye guys, just kidding, that's not where the story ends. So following these events, everybody would end up going on back to the village and they would end up finding out about the death of Hiruzen. Everybody would then actually end up having to attend this funeral, and Deku and Naruto would both actually take it very, very hard. Matter of fact, everybody in the village is taking it hard because all of them had a connection to Hiruzen in one way or another. I mean, he was the Hokage of the village after all. That said, however, luckily, Naruto and Deku both had each other to help them up in terms of, being happy, as well as Kakashi was there, and they would also have the moral support of Sasuke. So they will be fine, luckily. That being said, they would end up having about 1 week to think things through before Jiraiya is then ultimately offered the spot of being a Kage, and he would decline this, saying that a better option would be somebody like Tsunade. Yep, that leads us to our next arc, the Tsunade retrieval arc. So, yeah. Like for part 5.